JJ Humphrey. We're back on Elephant in the Room. Bob, we got a special guest today.
We sure do.
Jason Murphy. So Jason was actually there, I think one session. I think you termed out, Jason, when I came in. When did you term out? 2018?
That's right. Yep.
Yeah. So Jason was one of those guys who had the unique ability to stand wherever he wanted, make the votes wherever he wanted, and not make a whole lot of people mad, and be able to get along with everybody, but was very conservative, and probably one of the most conservative people I've known up there, but yet was able to stay in with leadership, and everybody has a super knowledge of, political and how the process works. And so that's why we asked him on today, because we want to talk about the structure, the new structure. So, Jason, have you seen this type of structure? So, Bob, maybe we ought to share what kind of structure we're talking about so that everybody understands. I'm not sure everybody has seen the new structure of the House of Representatives. And so what we're talking about is that now you have the speaker, you have the floor leader, but then you have all of these committees kind of set up under one committee. So let's take public safety. That's my wheelhouse. So used to, you just had several different committees and they answered to the floor leader. Today, you will have about 5 committees under one public committee. I think it's judicial. And then he will kind of kill or sort out and look at everything. Everything has to go through him, and then it goes to the floor, which is one more process that it takes to go through the floor. And again, what normally happens is they're going to pick people that they like, that they can control, to be in these top seats, and then everything kind of funnels behind that. Now, Jason, would you say that's a kind of accurate description, or would you describe it some way else?
I think you've about got it. It's taken what used to be a series of policy committees, which heard policy bills, and it's applied a new 2-tier structure to that, where you have policy committees, and then now you have very powerful oversight committees, which backstop those policy committees. So if a bill is introduced in a, air quotes, policy committee now, and it receives a pass motion and a vote out of the committee, now it's going to be required to go to another committee before it goes to the floor leader's office for consideration. And so essentially it requires that legislation to go through the process of receiving the approval of 2 committee chairmen, any one of which could presumably kill the bill, as opposed to just 1 committee chairman. And as we all know, in the House of Representatives, that's the most important determiner of whether or not a bill will pass committee or not. It's not the committee vote. 90% of the times the committee votes for a bill. It's the behind the scenes process by which a chairman makes that decision. And this has taken one of those individuals and cloned them or doubled them.
Right. So just so our listeners understand that every committee has a chairman over that committee. And that chairman supposedly can decide whether a bill is dead or whether it goes on. Now, I will tell you, as chairman, they just cut my throat earlier. But as chairman, I was often told, I'll give you an example. I had come out with the furry bill. So I'd made a furry bill, and it made worldwide attention, but I knew they would never pass the furry bill. So I always had a plan for the furry bill, because it was in, I think that's Title 70 education. And so they would not let the 10 Commandment bill get heard. And so what I did, I stuffed that 10 Commandment bill. I talked them into giving that bill to my committee, and I stuffed the 10 Commandment bill in there. And then I moved somebody else's name on it so they wouldn't think it was my bill, because they watch me like a bird dog. So I put somebody else's name on it so I could sneak that bill in. Now, it's bad that you got to sneak a 10 Commandment bill on a bunch of Republicans who claim to be Christian Republican, but that's what has to happen. So I tried to sneak that in there, and the last minute, guess what I get a call? Floor leader, JJ, no, you ain't going to do that. You're not going to sneak that bill in like that. And I'm like, do y'all got nothing else to do but to watch me all day? You got a sad life if that's all you got to do. But that's how they control, so they don't, even with the structure we got right now, the floor leader, when they don't want something, can call down there and tell you, just like mine, I would have said, no, I'm going to hear it. But they said, nope, we're pulling it. So they could pull it already. So why do they need this structure to do it?
I have a feeling it's a dispersal of power. It's about creating the appearance that power is being dispersed. And so the problem they have is when the floor leader has to be the bad guy over and over again. Or maybe in the past, he would tell a lot of people, yes, we're going to hear your bill. But then he ends up, his schedule or whatever it is, he decides maybe we can't. And then if he views his chairman as being weak and not filtering properly, this is a way for them to put a new layer in of about 5 people who are usually the lieutenants. They're very close to leadership, and they can take and disperse the risk of alienating their own members amongst themselves. So no, it wasn't the floor leader's fault now, it was the oversight committee chairman's fault. And that way they have a way of pushing bills off to the side before they have to make the tough call of whether or not to put them on the floor or not. Because every time they make one of those calls, they make someone mad. And that's the problem with the way that the power in the House is structured. All power really goes to the speaker and whoever he wants his appointees to be.
Right.
But the problem is when you have the buck stopping with you on every decision like that, instead of doing the right thing and dispersing the power, then it eventually catches up to you. And so you have to, if you're in that role, play a very complicated game. No, it's the caucus's fault. They voted against it in a secret whip count, which I'm not going to show you the results of, but you'll have to take my word on it. No, it's the Senate's fault. You don't know it, but some senator killed your bill. I know the backstory. Don't tell anyone what I told you, but I sure didn't have the Senate kill it. They killed it. Or it's the majority leader's fault, or it's the schedule's fault. It's, your fault, Representative. You debated on the bill before your bill, and we didn't have time for your bill. You should have just hit your green button. And
I can't tell you how many times they've told me that. I'll give you an example. They had a bill that Eccles had me run because it was going to be too hot. He didn't want his name on it. It's for his area. And it was infrastructure, critical infrastructure. It wasn't letting homeless people set up on underpasses and on sidewalks and stuff like that, which I don't see why is that, why is that so controversial? But it was. And so anyways, I get it. I'm out there hammering it on the floor, catching heat and everything else. And then I had a bill that was my bill, which was to take pornography out of the school. And and I had it in writing that they would agree to hear that. And when I got through with that critical infrastructure, I got it passed. But then they said, well, you're too hot. You're too hot. We can't let you hear this bill. And I'm like, wow, you're going to tell me you're going to kill a pornography bill in school? And again, that's the kind of stuff that's going to come back and haunt them when they want to run for governor and those kind of things. That's the kind of stuff that will come out that is going to be hard to overcome, in my opinion, But that's the way they kill stuff. It's just unbelievable how many good bills get killed in the methods that you're talking about.
Yep.
Jason, when you were there, they did this under Lance Cargill, correct?
Correct.
Same system. Is this the same? Can you tell whether this is the same thing that he did? They just copied what he did?
It's very similar. I think his design was much more thoughtful back in the day, in that what he was trying to do was combine the appropriations and the policy committees. That's something this structure doesn't do. But his goal was, as he put it, to allow members to truly specialize. And so it reduced the overall numbers of committees that a member served on. And it was designed, it didn't work out this way, but it was designed so that one representative, I think we had to call them subcommittees at that time, could be on a subcommittee. And the goal was that they would truly get into nuance and specialize and hopefully we would have a member-driven budget that would be built from a zero base up by the members of the House. And the budget part of that never materialized, but it was, I think, a logistical nightmare no matter what, because without reshaping the structure of the legislative session, it's almost impossible logistically to give all bills to committee hearings. And so what will happen is that oversight agenda gets very, very long, which ironically will probably tend to lessen the deliberative effect. Members just won't have the bandwidth or the time to spend on those very lengthy agendas that you will see up on deadline week. But the gist of it was when we had this system in 07 and 08, I think probably the intent was different. The intent of this one is clearly to take the pressure off of the floor leader's office. I think the intent of Cargill's system was probably to allow the members to actually do a member-driven budget by combining appropriations and policy. But it didn't work, and we didn't get to do the member-driven budget. The budget was kind of like it evolved strangely that year because of the power sharing arrangement in the Senate. But it didn't stick. It was abandoned after just the 07-08 legislative sessions.
Jason, how long have the Republicans been in charge? Do you know?
So in the House since the 2005 session, and all of state government since 2011.
So you come in right after. Did you term out? I think you did term out, didn't you?
Yes, in 2018.
2018. So you were there shortly after 2005.
Correct. I was in the second majority Republican House.
Okay, so you've been there kind of through the whole thing. You know, Republicans always say that we want less government and we want local government. And has it been your experience? I mean, you're talking about a 20-year span roughly that the Republicans have owned the House. Do you think you've seen less government or more government during that 12 or 20-year period?
So in the what I call the first generation of majority Republicans, there was a vision for how to get to smaller government, and there was a desire to do it. And every legislative session, we would set a Republican agenda, and that would consist of a good part of it. How can we make government smaller, more efficient, less intrusive, more transparent? And there was a recognition that the system was broken, that we had inherited a bad system as it relates to legislative process. And there was a desire to fix that too. And so I could point to in the early years, pretty much with every new 2-year cycle, we would make progress. And I was very optimistic, and I would say, it's a game of tug of war. When we lose, we get pulled back towards the line a little, but we just got to keep pulling, and we make a little progress every time. But what changed that, as I kind of watched, the transparency sort of started ebbing out after 2014. And then in the last half of the Fallon administration, when they had their revenue shortfall and they abandoned principle on taxes and instead of more reduced spending and more efficiency, they went for the tax hikes. It destroyed the culture of the Republican caucus at all of those different levels of government. It absolutely destroyed that, plus the purge of the conservatives that happened in 2018, and that culture was gone.
Now, just for our leaders to know, when Jason says the purge of the conservative Republicans, that is a group of Republicans that were known as the Patriot Group, and they got eaten up, cannibalized by our own party. They got taken out. The big money went against them. I think there was 18. I was actually in that group, 18. And I think of the 18, maybe 4 of us made it back out of that. So, it was that in and by itself, the fact that you'll take out your own party, and that's still going on. our house leaders are still targeting. And what's funny, they'll tell you, oh, you can't even be taking a photo with somebody's opponent, but they'll go out and try to find you. They'll actively try to recruit an opponent against you. And so it's just amazing to me how that works, how you cannibalize your own party. But what I'm looking at is that I've been there 9 years. So I come in right before I come in on the 17. So I was there 17 and then ran again 18. So this is my starting 9th year right now. And we have, you've seen OMES become a nightmare. It was supposed to reduce government. That thing has.
That was Jason's bill.
Jason.
Is that not true, Jason?
Well,
I carried that for the speaker back in the day. It was one of those efficiency reforms back in the day designed to say, if there are shared and central services that all agencies share, then we've got to cut the administrative overhead over those shared service.
It seemed to never turn out that way, though.
OMES will only be as good as two groups hold it accountable, and that's the governor and that's the legislature.
Well,
if you don't do that, you have a risk, but you have the ability to hold them accountable because those processes are consolidated and they're not hidden with a bunch of different bureaucrats. They're actually accessible and manageable if you'll manage them.
But here's where I'm at. What should have happened in OMES, you should have done away with a lot of your business, especially with the ability that we have today to everything could be done electronically, come in and be paid out of OMES where you didn't have this. We got 1,700 employees, but really we only have 900 employees and we're scheming the system. Or we claim we have 3,600 just so we can scheme the system. And if you would do that, so here's the deal. I'm not opposed to the original ideal of OMES, but what I'm saying is nobody is holding these agencies, OMES, the corrections, DHS, all of these. And when you come out and you try to hold them accountable, then guess what? You're the troublemaker. You're the sorry person. Even if you document it very, very well, guess what? You're still a troublemaker. Look at Bob. They call him a troublemaker. So Bob's over there causing trouble for the director of the Department of Corrections all the time, Jason. But nobody's listening to him when he has massive amounts of evidence of the director abusing travel, of the director taking a $90,000 raise without any kind of documentation to say that there was actual raise. And again, you don't raise a person's salary, you raise the director's. So the director's salary is the director. Whoever comes in behind, whoever comes in, that's the director's salary. They raise it $90,000 from 185, top in the nation, one of the top in the nation with one of the smallest departments. And yet nobody's got one document to show that was actually done. And then when you call that out, guess what? You're considered a troublemaker. It's just unreal.
That's what I would call the death of oversight culture. And so in those early Republican majorities, there was an ideal that the legislature could do oversight on the bureaucracy for the right reasons, to get efficiencies, transparencies, ensure ethics, best practices and standards were applied. But that is an ongoing effort that has to occur relentlessly by the legislature, and it has to have the culture of the House itself behind it. It has to be part of the ethos, part of the culture. The problem that you've gotten once you've allowed that caucus, you've purged the conservative members, you've taken out those who are the most likely to value that culture, to seek to number one, know why it's important, and number two, seek to implement it, and then number three, skip the lobbyist lifestyle and the nights out, and instead focus on the policy and on the hearings and the oversight. The current culture is a lazy culture. It's not a deliberative culture. It's not a smart and intelligent and intellectually curious culture. If you watch a committee meeting or a floor session, you'll quickly understand that this isn't about holding bureaucracies accountable. This is about being incredibly goofy incredibly intellectually light, and in many ways simply carrying water probably for the lobbyists in the request bills, the agencies in the request bills. And in that way, that deliberative culture that the first generation of majority Republicans had as part of its ethos, it's just not there. And that's why
Here's the
I
deal,
think there's.
if you try to do what you're talking about, if you come in and start to ask questions, if you start coming in and being inquisitive, that you actually read a bill and you have disagreements or you have legitimate concerns, how's this bill going to be answered? What is this going to be? I had one group, they were really worried about all the questions. I said, hey, don't worry about the questions. I walked in and said, hey, this bill is easy as falling off a log. If you can fall off a log, vote yes on this bill. That's what I said. Guess what? Voted yes. I mean, that's you know what I'm saying? That is no way, but I just laughed because that's what, you know what I'm saying? That's all you got to do. Why do I need to waste time sitting here, and people, oh, JJ, you shouldn't say stuff like it. I just laugh and go, why not? It's true. I just proved it to you. I went in there and said that. Got to vote yes. Again, we ought to be looking at all of these. There's unintended consequences in many, many bills. You ought to be checking them. What good? Most of the bills that we pass are all. I'm going to give you an example of what, when I was a kid, we used to go swimming down in a swimming hole. And we was on these little bitty motorcycles. And the guy where you had to turn had two big old Dobermans. Man, they were big. They were bad. And what we'd do, we'd pull a rope with the tow sack tied on it. And them old dogs all the time would grab that tow sack. Then you'd roll them down the road, Well, that's what these legislators are. Half these bills are just a tow sack that they pull by them and they grab hold of them and they think, well, we've really done something and we've really got into. And again, most of them don't amount to it. What they're letting through and what they're doing amounts to very little. There's a lot of activity without too much meat on the bone, is what I'm saying.
It's a great way to put it.
Yeah, it's insane. And
here's kind of long to get to the point there.
I thought it was awesome, Bob. I think people have to have a visual to get the visual, Bob. Did you miss my visual, Bob?
I did.
I can repeat it if you want me to.
No, that's okay. That's okay. Hey, Jason, in your experience, the times you were there, how many times did y'all audit an agency?
So there was a very large Department of Corrections audit that was done the interim of 2007. Republicans had long felt that a lot of waste was in the Department of Corrections, that the culture of that agency had been built up to be pretty corrupt. And so that was one of the big political hot potato issues of that year that I think the Democrats attacked as, you're spending too much money on this big audit. And that was one of the speaker's priorities. It was viewed as a bust because a lot of people felt that they didn't find the smoking gun they were looking for.
Was that under Byrd? What was the director's name? He worked for Mary Fallon.
It was before that. It was Justin Jones, who was the longtime Democrat director.
Yeah, I worked there for Jones. We actually turned in a bunch of stuff on that audit.
Okay.
I don't think now that there's corruption there necessarily. I think that they have a leader who has a problem, which creates the problem overall. But
I disagree. I'd say he's the corruptest individual I ever seen in my life. I'd call him corrupt, Bob.
Okay, but I've never, since I've been around, I've never seen an audit of an agency. Why would we not do an audit these agencies? What's the reason for that? Do you have any idea?
So the one thing that they told us when they did the tax hikes in the 2018, 2017 years was that you would have loft created. I think the thought was that maybe leadership couldn't give us a reduction in spending that we all knew we should have if it weren't for lobbyist and agency influence. But at least they would put in the infrastructure so that you would have it going forward. And so I think the idea was that everyone came to the conclusion that the House was situated in a way that they weren't going to be able to get that done. So they created a whole new agency basically for just what were supposed to be ongoing audits that would allow for there to be policy that would come out of those that would eliminate the wasteful activities and the inappropriate activities.
Well, if they would set OMES up right, they would be a loft. You wouldn't need loft. That's what they should be doing, is knowing every financial, and again, everything should be the CEO of the state. Every financial thing come in there paid out of that, and that way you'd take away from a lot of the problems you have in these administrations if they would run it right. But we turned over. Me and Bob went to asking DOC about, I don't know, 5 years ago, probably 4 or 5 years ago. How many employees do you have? Correctional officers. Took 3 months to get an answer that was over 50% wrong. When they gave us the answer, we had already went out and figured it out. And again, what they were missing was somewhere they finally come back and said 940 officers when they originally said 300. And they come back 940. Well, at the time, the minimal pay for the lowest paid officer was $55,400, I think, for the total package, And so we were able to find over 80 million when we went and looked in probation and nursings and all of that, correctional officers. And we actually got a $43 million raise for the Department of Corrections employees without one dime new appropriation, without one dime new taxes. That's going from year to year. So it wasn't imaginary money. It was real money that they were padding the books. And we found 80 and they said, oh, don't worry about it. And here's the deal. Where's that other 40 going? And again, then immediately after we got that, guess what they did? They froze the hiring. Here we were shorthanded. We get the raise hoping that'll attract people. They freeze the hiring. So again, guess what they did? They just, you know what I'm saying? They just doubled down on what they were doing, and nobody will hold them accountable.
Jason, under this new program, when you look at it, it looks very, very confusing to me. But does it give the speaker more power, or is it the same amount of power he has?
It gives leadership more power in that they can control the negative perception that comes out them by better dispersing the blame, even though they can still throttle. They have a new cork point. It's a cork in the bottle, right? They put a new one in. So they have a new way to dam up and stop grassroots legislation, for instance, that's headed their way that they don't want.
So it's all about making all these changes. And I don't know whether it's good or bad, but they've made all these changes to the system. And what are we getting? We're getting, so they don't get blamed for something? Is that what we're getting?
It disperses the blame from the floor leader to potentially 5 super committee chairs. And in exchange for that, it creates a logistical hurdle. I don't think they're going to overcome. I think that's what sunk it last time. Just logistically, it's really not feasible or possible to do it this way.
Well, and they're going to set up these times, just like getting on the floor. You got to get this in by so-and-so. You got to get this in by adding that extra layer. It's just another layer of bureaucracy you got to. And like I say, whoever's over that layer is going to get the blame, but they don't care because they're in tight with leadership, and all they're doing is whatever leadership tells them. So leadership will come, and tell, hey, Bob, we don't want this bill. Kill that bill. Okay, Bob's going to kill the bill because he's going to do whatever leadership says, So boom, Now Bob's going to get the blame where the floor leader don't get the blame. But guess what? Bob's going to keep this position. So everybody, if they want a bill to get through, guess what? They're going to have to be nice to Bob. So Bob don't care because everybody's got to be nice to him. And he likes that. And now he's got a little position of power. So Bob likes that. So guess what? This for a certain selected few is a good deal. But for the rest and for the state of Oklahoma, it stinks. And the deal is, just like you said, they're going to kill legislation, this good legislation, where nobody ever got to see. And here's what we have to do. What I'm trying to do is I'm finding that legislation, and we're going to start making cartoons about tracking that legislation through the process so that when they kill it, guess what? They own it. And we're going to try to let the public know this is a smoke screen. It's still being ran. Give credit where the top guy, the buck stops there, and he gets the credit for it. And that's what we need to try to lay on, or that's what I'm going to try to do.
Sure. I think that it definitely, and I like that idea. I think the thing to think about is that for the grassroots legislation, where there isn't an institutional or a moneyed power behind it, it doubles the hurdles, right? It means 2 chairmen are blocking instead of 1. Right. For the powerful institutions, your agencies who notoriously co-opt their chairman of policy, and for your moneyed special interests, those who have resources and means and a highly paid lobbyist with a big expense account, they're still likely going to have the ability to force that legislation through because they have the means and the relationships to do it. So more likely than not, it does shift the balance of power more towards the bureaucracies and the moneyed special interest. And you're right, it does create those 5 super chairmen who will receive more attention and interest from special interest. And it probably will withdraw some of that from the policy committee chairman, simply because their importance is now degraded. Because if the oversight committee guy is not on it, he's not on it, right? So he's going to get the power and the attention. But now the policy committee chairman doesn't have the ability to greenlight a bill and get it on the floor. He greenlights a bill and gets it to the next chairman's desk for consideration. And that's just not the same power as what he had before. And so for those guys that are chairing the policy committee, their role has been diminished. And that's another reason why it doesn't work, because it has a hard time keeping the support of even the committee chairman once they come to terms with the fact that their role's been diminished and their power's been diminished. Now, in my view, all of it should be diminished. I think you saw in House Resolution 1001, which is the roadmap for the future, that a certain number of the members' bills should be guaranteed a hearing in committee and on the House floor.
That's Tom Gant's bill you're talking about, correct?
Yes. It essentially said that there would be a class of bill called priority class, where every member could designate 2 of their 8 as priority. That means it receives priority and consideration, both in committee and a guaranteed hearing. And if approved there, it receives priority consideration on the floor and a guaranteed consideration. Now, that means there will be some bad bills that legislators have to cast a bad vote on, and they won't want to do that. But at the end of the day, that takes all the pressure off.
Yeah, you got to stand up and be accounted. You got to tell your public which actually way you're voting. And get a lot of people.
No more hiding behind the smoke screen and the closed door and the chairman and the floor leader. Just man up and cast a vote and let the people decide if you support their values or not.
I love it. Hey, that's what we were trying to get done when we were trying to get somebody to run against this speaker. We were trying to make whoever ran agree to that right there. They had to agree. And the other thing is, Jason, when I came up there while you were still there, when I came in, you had lobbyists that would come and 250 here, 250 there. They just donate to everybody. But as you've seen, these lobbyists no longer need legislators' votes, because guess what? Everything is controlled by 4 or 5 people. And so guess what? All these lobbyists give money to the, to the top people. They start these wolf gangs or, mammoth pack or some kind of pack that they call it. And then they give the money to whoever they want, whoever cooperates with them. And so guess what? Somebody like me, you're not likely going to, they just got a hold to me and said, we want you to attend this ag fundraiser. I said, why would I attend the ag fundraiser? They all hate my guts because I call cattlemen's out. I call Farm Bureau out, call all of them out. If they do something good, I'll say they did something good. But generally, they're not doing anything good. They're generally doing something that I think is bad. And so consequently, you don't get any kind of funding, which is okay. But even more control, it's more and more control. When they control 100% of the money, when all of these lobbyists don't need to even consider that it's become so powerful that 6 or 7 can control it so much that they no longer even need to go meet with you. I can remember used to lobbyists would come and try to talk you in or out of their bill, or whatever they were wanting you to do. Guess what? They don't do that anymore. And it may just be they know not to waste their time with me. That may be the deal. But I don't see them doing it with any other legislators. They don't have to. They go straight into the speaker's office. This is what we want. Okay, that's what you get. And that's the way the whole process works, is that we answer to the lobbyists and to the special interest. Or that's what appears to me.
The laundering of lobbyists' money through leadership PACs has gone back a while, but I think probably what was new in more recent years was there was probably a stronger push for more of that money to go through leadership PACs as opposed to directly to the members. I do think that's right. And I think that was, I call it the imperial speakership. That was a control mechanism to keep the members in line. And the leadership was able to maintain about a 50-30 divide, whereas in days previous, there was almost always an even break where you would have 30-some members kind of with one group and 30-some members with another group. And that imbalance has been part of what's caused the culture to atrophy. It's part of being a massive majority as well. It's one of those things that when the Democrats are so small in number and the Republicans can basically suspend the rules whenever they want anyway, there's been a culture of laziness. And then there's been a very strong leadership. And then those new members that replace the conservatives are not, in my view, serious-minded people. They're there enjoying a lifestyle. They're there enjoying being important, but they're not there for conservatism or for principle. Now, this year we're starting to see a reversal of that. You're starting to see it right size. And in a large way, a couple of things have happened. One is the dark money almost does more harm than good now. I think it was responsible in the purge years for tricking voters because their leftist candidates would run against them because the conservative incumbent was too conservative. The dark money would attack the conservative anytime they had danced with the devil in a vote for being compromising of values and being too liberal. And so they would use the dark money and the liberal candidate to squash the conservative in the middle. And that's how they purged conservatives. That doesn't work anymore. People, voters, Republican primary voters, especially in closed Republican primaries, they don't believe that dark money. And if the dark money drops, it may even help the person it drops against. And in the last election cycle, I don't know how many, combined resources, it may have been north of $1 million that Wallace spent trying to hang on to his seat. It didn't work.
1.2 million is what I'm told.
And those House district closed Republican primary voters, they're smart and they don't believe dark money just because something showed up. And see, it's an incredible thing to see. I think it's part of the rise of independent media on social media. It's really trickling down to the state level now, and more educated voters. And so we're going to see this right sizing continue. What you saw on that rules vote here the other day should have been a wake-up call. hardly ever do Republican members vote no on the rules. And whenever they barely got, I don't even think they got to 70. It was a real warning sign that Republican House members are going to be courageous now, and they're going to start to oppose imperial leadership. And then there are more reinforcements coming. It's not going to stop. Now they're trying to change the system. They're trying to get rid of the closed primary. That would be very damaging. I don't think they'll be able to. And I think the dark money has lost its power. And so we're seeing the right sizing occur now. And that's what I would really want to highlight. When you saw HR 1001 sponsored, that is the roadmap of the future. This current legislature and operates under the least, for other reasons than we've discussed here, the most centralized power set of rules that we've probably seen in the Republican era. But I think it's the worst it will ever be. I think from here on out, it's only going to get better.
Boy, I hope so, because again, the fact that when you stand up, I can't believe that I can call out agencies, DHS, for allowing sexual abuse in their agencies, and again, it's not maybe. I mean, here's all the evidence. We know the evidence is there. We know that kids were tortured, and we got all the evidence, and we have an AG that won't even ask for an investigation. We have a governor who won't ask for an investigation. We had a House and Senate leadership who won't ask for an investigation. And then they go after me big time for asking, and I ordered an investigation, which we had the authority to do. And we showed statutorily we did have that authority. And I'd be darned if the OSBI and the whole bunch wouldn't do it, even though we had the statutory authority. And again, then come and kill your committee, come and kill you as chairman, which my deal is I'll wear that as a badge of honor. I don't mind that a bit, because that ain't going to slow me down. But that's the stuff that we're talking about. Because here's, Jason, you see if you think I'm going to be right. I'm going to prophesy, and I've already prophesied on here about this. JJ the prophet, the current administration has been there. They got birthed into that position, okay? I mean, they just walked into it. They walked into leadership from the moment they arrived, because they're tied to money or because they're tied to somebody. I don't know all the reasons, but that's the way it was. Now, here's the deal. They hadn't tried to hold one agency accountable since I've been there. They hadn't tried to do anything to cut money, cut, spending, everything. I hadn't seen anything. And now they're going to come out and they're going to say, we're going to be like Donald Trump. We're going to imitate Donald Trump, because that's the thing to do. And that's what they do. They imitate this stuff. They're deception. They're imitators, but they're not the real deal. And so what they're going to do is come with a Oklahoma Doge, or Doge. Am I saying that right, Bob? Doge. And then they're going to claim that they're going to hold these agencies accountable. But guess what? We ain't seen it happen in 9 years. I say that Donald Trump is fighting the swamp. These guys are the Oklahoma swamp. They are what's been in charge. And why? Guess what? We hadn't seen none of this. So why all of a sudden, after 9 years, are we going to believe that we're going to see this? What do you think?
You'll always see leadership with their finger in the wind and detecting the political flavor of the day. And I hope this sticks. It would be great if they would return to a modernization culture and climate. And if it's working in DC, it will cause legislators in Oklahoma to be inspired. More will want to emulate that, and especially the new ones that are coming on. But you've got to understand that this leadership group, in their various roles over the years, have grown Oklahoma government in ways we could have never imagined in terms of size and scope. And every component that we used to defend, whether it be health insurance mandates, unfunded COLAs in the retirement system, spending, creation of new higher ed universities, creation of new agencies, boards, and commissions. The list goes on and on. The number of betrayal of our values. I track it. When I see one come across, I'll put abandonment of principle and which principle they're abandoning that we used to hold to. And so that mindset shift, it's just like a hard gear shift from growing government to Doge. That's a whiplash that it's going to be hard for them to navigate because that's not who they are. And from a political perspective, better late than never, I guess, but there's only so much they can gain from it, because no matter what they run for in the future, anyone's going to be able to point back and say, well, you voted for that budget, you voted for this, you grew government by whatever percent, you grew government spending by whatever percent. So yes, maybe you did have an efficiency or two later on, but that's not going to justify everything you've done. And that's what makes it so hard for them to really take this forward and do it meaningfully. And then the other thing that we always see is that when we did the OMES reform and associated process reforms back in the day, it was because those agencies didn't have institutional power. Whenever we would take on an agency that did, the legislators would lock down on us. There were many reforms that were needed. And even in the first generation, we couldn't get, just because it's where the moneyed special interests are. And so until there are more and more legislators who are just going to say, you know what, I'm going to make a sacrifice for this state. I'm going to live a life where I abstain from that lifestyle. I abstain from that money. I just don't care. I'm going to do what's right. Until we have a certain number of legislators who will take that vow and stick to it, you're only going to be able to have a Doge project that is minutely effective. Realize it's just a fraction of its total potential, because it's going to stumble on a moneyed or an institutional power, a moneyed special interest or an institutional power that it won't be able to overcome. The only way that happens if for legislators to truly be sacrificial leaders who just swear off the all of that pomp and circumstance and power that comes with the office and say, I'm not doing it, I'm going to be different. And then if you have a certain number of those, and they'll take some hard votes and alienate some powerful people back in their district who have a way of life that's built around the institution, then you could truly see those efficiencies come about. And I think that's possible in the future. More and more legislators take those commitments. But until more do, there's only so much progress to be made in that area, because they're going to hit their head on the person who's giving all the money to the wolf pack, right? The getting all these Republicans elected, as they would say. And that's why you can only see so much in the way of reform. As long as that money's there, the powers are going to be in the way to stop meaningful reform.
I 1000% agree. And one of the things that I'm talking to some of our grassroots people about is to provide more information. Now, you take a guy like me, I'm always digging on corruption. I pay very little attention to the bills. So I may vote, I probably have voted some bad stuff, but where I'm out, I may be out in the hall working. I'd rather run in and just look at somebody I trust. Boom, I'll vote stuff, because I am working on corruption, because I think half the bills are just, I hate to be this way, but they're a joke, because they're set up. They're that toe sack that I'm talking about, dragging down the road. Most of them really amount, although they do hide their little money stuff in that, and the budget is where they hide most of that stuff in there. And so we've got to get, but what I'm asking the grassroots, go in and dig that out. Tell me what's a bad bill. Tell me why it's a bad bill, so that I have the talking points with it. I don't mind standing up, but you can't read 60 bills like they want to shove on you a day, and that's by design as well. And you can't keep up with all that. So I'm hoping that the grassroots people will help and look at, pick 30 or 40. You can't do 2,000, but pick the top 30 or 40 that you want to really drill down on and say, this as conservatives, you shouldn't vote for, or you should vote for, and this is where we stand. And I hope we'll see some of that this year.
I think one of the issues we're going to have is that those new rules, one of the things, we've talked a lot about the committee structure. There were several other reasons why those were the worst rules. And one of them is it does appear that it's shortened the conference committee transparency deadline. especially in May, if you run in there and cast your vote like that, you are playing with fire, because those conference committee reports now can be filed the day before. I mean, it almost looks like they've waived the public hearing requirement that goes with it, which was a big reform in 2011. So my advice would be do whatever you can in the evening before to read those bills. If you want to do a lazy rule of thumb, I don't advise this. I advise reading the bill for yourself. But if you want to do a lazy rule of thumb, this one will save you most of the time. Go in that chamber in the back. If you see Tom Gannon red and you're in green, you've got to ask yourself, why am I green and he's red? Because if you really think about the answer, he's reading those bills. And I've analyzed them. I've pulled what I call like the green governance report. The guys who go green the most, he's one of the least. He and Rick West in red. So he's voting no about 40% of the time. And if you look at the bills, you can just align them with Republican principles, and you will see time and time again where, yep, that's what he caught. He's reading it, he's catching it. And so that is not something that I would advise as far as basing your votes on another representative. But what I would advise is if you're green and he's red, never feel comfortable, because something's probably wrong. Now, you may ask him or read it and you say, okay, well, I'm still green because we just have a disagreement of opinion. And that'll happen on a certain percentage of those. You'll see it one way, you'll see it another. But I'm telling you that as far as if you compare those votes to Republican principles, what you're going to find is very often he's caught something in there. And because he's not doing that lobbyist thing, he doesn't care. I mean, if you get mad at him, it's like, hey, I have to just vote the right way, right? And so that's when I would tell any member, if you got caught out the night before and didn't get your bills read, if you're fighting corruption in the hallway and doing God's work and you didn't have time or whatever, look at that vote first, and just never ever let yourself walk off that floor with you green and him red, and your conscience not kick up a little bit like, I'm missing something, I know it. And do your best to get back to that computer and find out what it is, or even ask him. But that's one really easy cheat I would highly recommend. But of course, the biggest thing is you need a triage system on bill reading, understanding that, especially with these new rules, what they've set up for what's going to happen late in session is rough, because they've made it easier to strike title. They're not even going to allow debate on a bill that has struck title on third reading. It's going to go into conference, and guess what? They made it easier to pop out of conference very quickly on you. And that's going to backload May, the end of session, for all kinds of bad things to happen. And these were reforms we fought for years to incorporate, and we took pride in them. It was part of our culture. We were making the place, the conference committee system is where all the bad stuff can happen. And so we took a lot of confidence in the fact that we were bringing transparency to that. Well, they've just kicked the door in on us there, and it looks very bad. And so what I am suggesting is, especially in May, after you wait until late in the evening, because they can file at any time during that night, drop it in on you, and then review what's been filed as best you can, but have a triage system in place so that you know what not to read and what to read, and you don't spend a lot of time and resources getting bogged down in something that's housekeeping or whatever. But this year, I think if you do that in that conference, in those conference committee reports, you're going to find some things in there that they're not going to be good.
Well, they've gotten worse and worse about slipping that, and not even, stealing a bill and not even taking it back to the committee. I can name me one bill. How did it even get to the floor? How did you even get that to the floor? And again, slipping these things in and out. That's just gotten worse and worse and worse. The transparency on the budget, they claimed this year to be transparent. I talked to 40 or 50 people. Have you had one input? Do you even know what's going on in this budget? And guess what? And then when you stand up there and question it, you just get the same, run around. So again, that's been going on for a while. And so I appreciate your input. I want to tell you, I respect your input. Listen to you. You have a great knowledge about our government and about how the process works. And so I appreciate you coming on here. And Bob, you got anything to say?
No, I was going to I'll echo what you said. That Humphreys I got the pleasure of serving with him and learned a lot. from Jason, and I appreciate him very much because he understands the system well. He'd vote no on some bill, and I'd say, Jay, why did you vote no on that? He explained it to me. He says, well, that made sense.
Right.
Wow.
Right.
Those were fun conversations.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
But I would like to see more input from, the Democrats get it and we don't get it. I would very much like to have grassroots input as to why, what do you want, what's the bills, and to be able to look at those and look at the points of that. So I hope that if you're listening with grassroots, I would love to hear from you. Love to see what you got. Love to hear what you're looking into bills on. So
I'm going to follow up with this. I'm going to ask Jason one more thing. In what you're saying, the way this system is working, it's going to get convoluted at some point in time. Is it going to be about time session's over with, trying to get bills done that never was heard, and trying to get everything down? Is it going to get worse?
It'll get very difficult on your first committee deadline, because logistically speaking, that'll be harder than the second committee deadline, the Senate bill deadline. So the House bill committee deadline is not going to be any fun. And if at that point your members aren't whispering, and remember, it's the imperial speakership, they can't talk too loudly out loud, they're scared to death. But if they're whispering, they're probably already doing it, but if they're not whispering in the hall, these guys have no clue what they're doing, then they're lost, because you'll realize it when you pull an oversight committee agenda of 50 bills and they're saying this is deliberation, because once you have a 50 bill agenda, anyone that asks a question or risks debating or anything, they're just going to get everybody glaring at them, right? So it's going to be like, do pass, do pass, do pass. They're just going to try to fly through that agenda. And then the committee chairman will be under pressure to eliminate bills. It's going to make the authors very upset, because it's one thing when a committee chairman won't hear a bill. It's another thing when a committee chairman won't hear a bill that another committee chairman heard. And so then the oversight committee chairman is going to be unhappy with the policy chairman for making him have to deal with it. And so my suggestion would be that you'll know very quickly that most of the members should have figured out that we messed up and we won't have to beat a strategic retreat on this. The question will be, is there some way they can fix it and save face by next year? Basically a mid-session rule change. And it's just going to depend on how stubborn leadership is, because it's going to look very bad for them to revert mid-session, but I suspect they'll probably have to.
Well, I appreciate you coming on with us. And JJ, thank you very much. Appreciate you.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Hey, we hope everyone's blessed. Jason, we appreciate you. We'll have you back on for an update when we get going and get your perspective on that.
I look forward to that.